What if I told you that the biggest opportunity to build wealth in your lifetime might be less than 2 years away? And what if that opportunity comes disguised as a disaster, one the media will warn you to run from, while the wealthiest people in the world quietly run toward it? In 2026, many analysts believe the global financial system could be heading toward a breaking point, something bigger than 2008, faster than 2020, and far more personal for everyday people. Housing, stocks, crypto, even the job market, nothing would be safe, except for the people who know exactly where to stand when the financial ground collapses. So here's the mystery I want you to think about throughout this video. How can a market crash make some people rich, while everyone else loses everything? And more importantly, how do you become one of the people who wins? To answer that, we need to rewind the story, because the seeds of a crash are never planted in the year it happens. They grow slowly, in moments that seem harmless at the time. Let's go back to 2008. When the global financial system crashed, millions lost their homes and jobs, and economies around the world were shaken to their core. Yet a select few, people like Warren Buffett, BlackRock, and hedge fund giants, made billions. Not by causing the crash, but by understanding something. Crashes aren't the end of wealth, they're a transfer of it. A transfer from the impatient to the prepared, from the emotional to the strategic, from those who panic sell to those who buy when prices are broken. And here's the twist. After 2008, the system didn't really recover. It was rebuilt, patched together with trillions in printed money, near-zero interest rates, and a promise that the economy would grow forever. But promises have expiration dates. In 2020, the pandemic stress-tested that fragile system again. Governments around the world injected even more money into the economy, at levels never before seen in history. Stocks soared. Real estate exploded. Crypto hit the moon. Everyone felt richer. But here's what almost nobody realized. The world wasn't creating more value. It was inflating the same value into bigger, more expensive bubbles. And what happens to a bubble? You can keep pumping air into it until suddenly you can't. The rise since 2020 wasn't a sign of strength. It was the setup for a future reckoning. Right now, beneath the headlines about AI, innovation, and stock market highs, something is quietly shifting. Governments are drowning in debt. Consumers are tapped out. Interest rates are squeezing households and companies like a vice. Banks are hiding massive, unrealized losses. Housing affordability is collapsing around the world. These aren't isolated problems. They are connected, like falling dominoes arranged in slow motion. The question isn't if they'll fall. It's which one will fall first, and what happens when the chain reaction begins. That chain reaction is what could trigger the 2026 market crash. But here's the paradox. In every crisis for the majority, there is an opportunity for the minority. The people who understand patterns, people who know history doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes. People who move before the crowd. By the time we finish this full video, you will understand what the real causes of a 2026 crash are, how to recognize the breaking point before it hits, what the winners do differently from the losers, and the 3 actions anyone can take to not just survive, but profit when markets fall. Because the smart money isn't waiting to react to 2026. It's already preparing for it. The only question left is, will you? To understand how we arrived at this moment, we have to zoom in on the years following 2020, because that's where the real story begins. When governments injected trillions into the system, the money didn't spread equally. It rushed into assets, stocks, crypto, real estate, and inflated prices to levels no one could have imagined just a decade earlier. People believed they were witnessing a new era of unstoppable financial growth, but in reality, it was like watching a skyscraper being built on sand. Central banks eventually realized the economy was overheating. Prices for food, gas, cars, everything began to surge faster than wages. For the first time in decades, inflation wasn't a distant concept from textbooks. It was in every receipt and every bill. Something had to be done, fast. So in 2022, central banks performed one of the most aggressive monetary reversals in history. Interest rates shot up at record speed. And here's what many people don't know. The economy responds to interest rate changes slowly, like a delayed explosion. The full damage doesn't hit immediately. It builds, quietly. It takes time for mortgages to reset, for companies to run out of cheap lending, for consumers to burn through savings, and that clock has been ticking non-stop. By late 2024 and 2025, the bill from those high rates starts coming due, and this is where the crash narrative sharpens into focus. Around the world, people are facing a simple but brutal math problem. Income isn't keeping up with the cost of living. Families who once felt financially stable are suddenly drowning. Higher mortgage payments, record credit card debt, rent rising faster than salaries, savings levels falling to historic lows. It's a squeeze from every direction. And when the middle class gets squeezed, the entire economy feels the pressure. Businesses notice it first. Sales slow. Expenses rise. Small companies shut down. Big companies start cutting jobs to protect profits. And that leads to the most dangerous condition in any economy. People spending less because they have less. A cycle begins. Less spending. Business losses, layoffs, even less spending, and eventually, mass panic. This panic is what turns a downturn into a crash. But this time, there's a new twist, a character in this story that didn't exist in every past recession, the everything bubble. Stocks are overpriced. Real estate is overpriced. Tech valuations are stretched beyond logic. Even art and collectibles skyrocketed into insanity. Almost nowhere is cheap anymore. So when fear returns to the market, the fall will be from higher than ever. All it takes is one spark. Maybe it's a big corporation collapsing under its debts. Maybe it's a wave of mortgage defaults. Maybe it's a geopolitical crisis or unexpected war. Maybe it's a bank quietly failing, and then another. Whatever the trigger, once fear hits the system, investors rush for the exits. And here's the thing almost nobody understands about that moment. You can't sell when everyone else is selling. By the time you feel the fear, the door is already closing. This is where the winners separate from the losers. The losers, they follow emotion. They say things like, "I'll get back in later when things are safe again." But that safe moment always arrives after the treasure has been picked clean. The winners, they look greedy at the worst possible times, because they know something crucial. Fortunes are built in crashes, not in booms. Let's look at history. In the Great Depression, the few who bought stocks at the bottom became legends. After 2008, hedge funds scooped up millions of foreclosed homes, now worth trillions. During the pandemic crash in 2020, those who bought instead of panicking made 100,000 to 500% returns in under 2 years. The pattern is there, waiting to be recognized. Crashes transfer wealth every single time, but not equally, not blindly. The winners prepare long before the crash arrives. And right now, the people who understand the 2026 setup are positioning themselves quietly. They're holding cash reserves instead of luxury purchases. They're researching industries that thrive in recessions. They're watching debt markets like hawks. They're identifying which assets are inflated and which ones will become once-in-a-lifetime bargains. Because here's the truth. A crash doesn't create value. It reveals value. Imagine a house worth $400,000 today. In a crash, maybe it drops to $220,000. Did the house itself change? No. The opportunity did. Buying when prices are on the floor takes courage. But that courage is what turns ordinary people into future millionaires. Now, here's the part that will surprise you. The biggest opportunities in 2026 won't just be in stocks. They won't just be in real estate. Some of them will be in assets most people currently ignore. We are heading into a period where entire industries could collapse and be rebuilt, where emerging technologies could shift power away from giants, and where governments themselves might rewrite the rules of money. New winners will rise. Old kings will fall. This isn't just a financial event, it's a transformation, and transformations are where generational wealth is created. But before we talk about where those opportunities are, we need to finish the story of how the crash happens. Because stories aren't just entertainment, they are roadmaps. History shows us the exact sequence of how bubbles burst. Every crash has 5 stages. 1. The origin, where the first cracks form. 2. The rise, where optimism blinds judgment. 3. The breaking point, where denial turns to fear. 4. The fallout, where panic creates chaos. 5. The failed fixes, where leaders make the wrong moves. And right now, as we sit here today, we are moving from stage 2 to stage 3. We've already lived the origin, the money printing and cheap debt. We're ending the rise, the euphoric asset pricing, and soon, denial will collapse into fear. Once the breaking point arrives, prices don't fall slowly. They fall like gravity remembered them. But here's the twist that almost nobody is prepared for. The greatest damage in 2026 may not come from falling prices. It may come from lost trust. Trust in money itself. When trust dies, panic becomes unstoppable. Smart investors are preparing for that moment now, not with panic, but with strategy. Because when the world screams crisis, the wealthy hear clearance sale. And if you understand this moment in history, you can join them. So let's zoom in on what happens next, stage by stage. Because once you see the pattern clearly, you'll realize this isn't prediction. It's déjà vu. The breaking point begins quietly. There's no headline saying, "The crash starts today." Instead, it begins with doubt. Investors start questioning whether prices can really keep rising forever. The first domino usually falls in a sector most people are paying attention to, like over-leveraged real estate developers, regional banks, or highly indebted corporations. Their downfall reveals a hidden truth the market has been ignoring. Debt is everywhere. Consumers owe record levels on credit cards and car loans. Governments owe more than they can ever repay. Companies borrowed cheap money for years and now can't handle the rising cost. Slowly, fear starts replacing confidence. Then, one event flips the switch. In 2008, it was Lehman Brothers collapsing. In 2020, it was a pandemic shutdown. In 2026, the trigger could come from many directions. It could be a major commercial real estate fund defaulting because office buildings are empty. It could be a bank admitting massive losses from bad loans. Or even a political crisis that shakes markets worldwide. Suddenly, everything investors believed yesterday dies today. Stocks start falling. Debt markets freeze. Crypto collapses under liquidation. And what was once considered the safest investment of all, real estate, begins to wobble. Homeowners who bought at peak prices realize they owe more than their house is worth. Renters fall behind. Mortgage defaults rise. You might think this is when governments and central banks step in to save the day. But that's where the next twist appears, because the usual tools to stop a crash are already weakened. In 2008 and 2020, interest rates were extremely low, so they could be cut further. Governments could print money without instantly collapsing confidence. But now, in 2026, rates are already high, inflation is still lingering, and trust is fragile. If central banks rescue the markets the old way, they risk something far worse, a currency crisis. If people stop believing in the money itself, not just the markets, then no rescue plan will work. That is the nightmare scenario economists rarely discuss publicly. So instead, we get what I call the failed fixes. Leaders will reassure us with statements like, "Markets are fundamentally healthy." This is just a short-term correction. We have everything under control. But behind closed doors, the panic will be real. Quick fixes create new problems. Lower rates too fast, inflation roars back. Too much printed money. Currencies weaken. Corporate bailouts. Public anger and unrest. It's a losing game. And as confidence collapses, fear becomes the dominant emotion across society. This is where most people make the biggest mistake of their lives. They rush to protect what little they have left by selling everything. They try to escape the falling market, not realizing that they are locking in their losses at the worst possible time. Meanwhile, a different group is watching calmly from the sidelines. Cash ready, research prepared, waiting for the moment when panic peaks and opportunity is greatest. This is the point in every economic disaster where the few get rich, quietly. They buy assets others must sell. They don't just survive the chaos, they feed on it. But how can they be so confident when everyone else is terrified? Because they've studied history. And history is repeating with almost eerie precision. Look at the charts of every major crash. 1929, 2000, 2008, 2020. The details change, but the pattern is identical. Bubbles, denial, panic, collapse, rebirth. What follows the crash is always the same: innovation, regrowth, new wealth creation. The key is surviving the fall and positioning for the rise. But let me give you another twist in the story, one that most analysts completely overlook. Every crash also creates a new world order. After 1929 came the rise of American industrial dominance. After 2000 came the birth of the Internet economy. After 2008 came the era of cheap money and big tech. After 2020 came a shift toward remote work, digitization, and AI. And after 2026, the shift could be even bigger. A restructured housing market where institutions lose power. AI transforming jobs and income models. New forms of digital assets and tokenized ownership. A new monetary framework possibly replacing traditional currencies. A massive transfer of wealth from old industries to new decentralized ones. The crash is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of the next economic era, but only for those who are prepared to take advantage of it. Most people will do the opposite. When the media screams collapse, they will freeze. They will wait for certainty that will never come. They will miss the bottom, just like they missed the top. That's why the secret of the rich isn't just money, it's mindset. They understand that chaos is the breeding ground of opportunity. They know that a market crash is not something that happens to you. It's something that happens for you, if you know how to react. But what exactly will the winners be looking for in 2026? What assets will fall the hardest, and then rise the most? Which industries will go extinct, and which will explode in growth? Where will the next generation of millionaires and billionaires be minted? Up until now, we've talked about the story, the cause and effect, the setup leading to impact. But the part that can change your life is what comes next. Because if you can spot the turning point, the moment when fear peaks and prices bottom out, you can take advantage of the biggest discount market of your lifetime. The roadmap is already forming. Real estate crashes hardest when jobs disappear. Stocks rebound earliest when innovation accelerates. Commodities spike when currencies weaken. Digital assets surge when trust shifts away from governments. And the wealthiest players will be ready to pounce. They're not waiting for headlines. They're studying the data. They're building cash reserves. They're planning their moves right now, in silence. While everyone else sleeps, they prepare. And that's exactly what this video will show you next. How to turn the fear of 2026 into your advantage. The 3 steps that separate the financially destroyed from the financially reborn. Because the truth is, a crash doesn't decide your future. Your response to it does. We've talked about the causes. We've talked about the chain reaction. We've talked about the opportunity hidden behind fear. But now we reach the part that truly matters. how you can transform knowledge into the choices that define your future. Because in moments like these, the world divides into two kinds of people: those who watch history happen, and those who rewrite their own. If the market truly crashes in 2026, the greatest advantage anyone can have is simple: readiness. And readiness begins with the thing most people misunderstand: cash. Most people see cash as safety, something to hold on to when everything else is falling apart. But those who build wealth during a crisis know a secret. Cash isn't meant to be a hiding place. It's meant to be ammunition. During a crash, prices don't correct. They collapse. So in 2025, while the world is pretending everything is fine, the smartest players will quietly reduce unnecessary spending, pay down the debts that could trap them, and build a reserve of capital that can be deployed when opportunity is at its most extreme. Not to hoard it, but to use it, to strike. But here's the truth many ignore: not everything you buy in a crash comes back up. Some investments die with the old economy they belong to. It happened in 2000 when countless tech companies disappeared. It happened in 2008 when millions of overpriced properties never recovered their hype. And in 2020, businesses resistant to technology simply ceased to exist. The real winners in every recovery are different. They are the innovators, the problem solvers, the industries that become more important in the world that emerges after the dust settles. Healthcare advancements, automation and artificial intelligence, secured energy transitions, digital finance, smart real estate located where people continue moving and working, even commodities that regain trust when money systems shake. These are not gambles. They are necessities. And necessities rise again. Still, the biggest battle in a crisis isn't fought in markets. It's fought in the mind. Fear doesn't just influence financial decisions, it controls them. News headlines will shout collapse, neighbors will whisper panic, and instincts will beg you to run from the falling market. But history is unforgiving to those who let emotions make decisions. The moment everything feels the worst, that is when fortunes quietly begin. Every cycle shows it. Those who wait for certainty always buy too late. Because when the recovery finally feels safe, the wealth has already changed hands. The difference between those who win and those who lose is not intelligence. It's emotional discipline. The courage to act when it feels uncomfortable. The patience to hold when everything tells you to sell. The vision to see beyond the storm. But I need to give you a warning. A real one. Financial crashes do not just damage portfolios. They test societies. Governments, desperate to restore order, often introduce new rules overnight. Withdrawals can be limited. Taxes can change. The movement of money can be tracked more tightly. Entire financial systems may evolve into forms people aren't ready for. Digital-only currency structures, banking restrictions, changes in ownership laws. It won't happen everywhere, but it could happen in the places where trust breaks the fastest. That's why preparation isn't just numbers in an account. It is understanding that the rules of the game may change, and preparing to adapt rather than panic. Because every great collapse in history does not end wealth. It redistributes it. It resets the board. It clears out what was bloated and outdated and makes space for what will define the future. Look at the pattern. The Great Depression reshaped global industry. The dot-com collapse gave birth to the modern internet giants. The 2008 crisis made way for big tech dominance. The pandemic crash accelerated AI and digital transformation. Each crash wasn't a full stop. It was a new beginning. And that's exactly what 2026 could become. A turning point where the people who adapt rise and the people who cling to the old ways fall. The world, after the crash, will create new winners. Entrepreneurs who solve fresh problems. Investors who bet on the rebirth instead of the destruction. Everyday people who had the courage to prepare and the wisdom to act. So here's the real question. The one only you can answer. When the world is panicking, when prices are falling faster than headlines can cover, when everyone around you believes the future is over, what will you see? Will you see disaster? Or will you see a window that opens once in a generation? Right now, in this moment, you are choosing which side of history you will stand on. You can ignore everything until the storm arrives, or you can use the time you have now to prepare for a moment that can define your life. Save more than you spend. Learn what others overlook. Plan while others delay. Because when the market collapses, most people will look back and say, "If only I knew." But you do know. You know that crashes don't destroy wealth. They move it. And if you move wisely, the wealth will move toward you. So prepare for what's coming. Not with fear, but with focus. Not with panic, but with purpose. Not by running from the falling world, but by standing exactly where the opportunity hits the ground. Because the 2026 crash could be remembered as a tragedy by the masses. But you could remember it as the moment everything changed. The moment you built the future you always wanted. History does not wait for approval. It rewards preparation. Be ready when the world resets.